to another edition of Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator at the School of Journalism and Mass Communications at KU.
Hello and welcome to Cheers to Careers. I'm Steve Ridinghouse, the Career Outreach Coordinator for the KU School of Journalism. My guest today, Mark Fagan, 1991 J School grad and copy editor for Burns & McDonnell. Mark, welcome.
Why, thank you, Steve. I appreciate being up here. It's nice being back up here at Stauffer Flint.
And I think this is your 10-year anniversary at Burns & Mac. How has that been going? I know you've had various roles with them over 10 years.
Exactly. Burns & McDonnell's a real interesting company. You know, we're employee-owned, so I like to say I'm an owner of one of the biggest design firms in North America, which is great. But yeah, it's been about 10 years. I've been in the corporate marketing department the entire time. I was a little bit in corporate communications, but yeah, doing several different roles. If I can run through them real quick.
Great.
I started as a writer-editor, and then I became a communications strategist, senior communications strategist. And I was a managing editor for our in-house magazine that we do. And now I'm copy editor, so that means that I review all of the materials that come out of corporate marketing. We've got a department of about 70 people spread out across the country, and I review all those materials before they go out.
I would imagine that's pretty intense when you say review all materials. I mean, I bet a lot of different platforms.
It is, and you know, it's funny. It's kind of like you know, in the olden days, you know, when I worked in newspapers, TV, online, all those kind of things. I worked on all kinds of different stuff, and I thought I worked on a lot of different things. Well, now, I mean, I handle everything from, you know, reviewing ad copy to news releases to brochures to videos to podcasts to internal campaigns to, I mean, it just keeps going down the list and down the list, and it's a lot of fun because we have so much stuff to do.
And you talked about newspapers. I know 20 plus years, I believe, Lawrence Center World and short time at Hutch News. I mean, how was that transition from newspapers to corporate communications?
Well, yeah, back in the day, I like to say, I worked in newspapers. You know, I had some internships in Florida, in Wichita, and then, you know, I've been working, you know, writing words since, gosh, it was my sophomore year of high school. I was working for the Springfield Times in Virginia. But the thing is, the transition was actually incredibly easy. And it's something that I didn't really expect to be so easy. But when I was in college, I worked for the University of Daily Kansas. I was a teaching assistant, I was an editor, I was a writer, all those different kind of things. And what was just crazy is that I loved writing about infrastructure. Infrastructure, oh yeah, ooh yeah. But I still think back to an article I did when I was on the Kansan. If you guys drive down Naismith Drive, you're going toward the field house and you're turning right to go in front, you know, the Naismith Drive down in front of the field house, there's a turn lane there. I wrote stories about that turn lane, and we did graphics about that turn lane, and we did all kinds of stuff. We wrote about the parking garage there. I was actually convinced that it was for relieving the parking pressure on south part of campus, when in reality it's for donors going to basketball games. But nevertheless, I enjoyed writing about that stuff. And so when a job opened up at Burns & McDonnell, I knew somebody on the staff, and you know, now I get to work on stuff with infrastructure all the time. Huge power lines, water treatment plants, highways, food production plants, you know, potato chips, I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. And, you know, I get to do that every day. It's something I truly love, and it's really a chance for me to do all the things that I was doing before. I get to do them every day now.
And I know we overlap at the Journal World by 11 years, and always admired your work. I mean, you did the city commission, you did the business reporting. I mean, you tackled pretty much everything that was thrown your way.
Right, and I think that's really, and that's very nice of you, Steve. I think it's one of the things that's interesting about journalism is that I think everything is storytelling, and I think that's kind of a broad theme that everybody can think about. And you can tell, as long as you know how to tell a story, you can tell it in any way. I mean, I covered city commission, I covered county commission, or county government, I covered business, I covered the school board, and then, oh, that's right, every once in a while they'd throw me on the road and I'd go cover KU basketball, fan stuff. So I'm talking to fans at the hotel, fans in the stands. Getting donors to talk about Roy Williams when he's getting ready to leave, if you guys remember Roy Williams. And so the thing is all that stuff, all those things that I was doing back then built up to what I do now, and it's the same kind of thing. I just do it at one company.
And I know you had a long history, like interviewing, like you said, the donors, the C-suite. I mean, how has that helped you transition to Burns & Mac? I mean, talking to those high-level executives.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. When I worked, well, it's really interesting to me. When I was working at the Journal World, you know, I interviewed a bunch of executives. I mean, the ones I remember is Bill Esri, when he worked for Sprint. He came to town, he spoke at the Lead Center, and I sat down with him for a half hour beforehand and talked to him about mobile and wireless and all these other kind of things. And then Alan Mullally, he's a KU grad. He went on to, he ran Boeing commercial airplanes, and then he was the CEO of Ford Motor Company. And I used to call him on his phone every once in a while. He'd pick up in his office. It was crazy. But what I never realized is that when I went to go interview for a job at Burns McDonnell, you know, I was interviewing and I'm telling some story about this. And I talked to some people afterwards and they were like, Mark, we like the idea that we can send you up to the C-suite and talk to our people about, you know, what they do. And it hit me. I said, wow, everything that I've done, every little experience, every tiny little thing, it doesn't even matter. It can be a throwaway deal. It all adds up to what you're going to do later. And it doesn't matter where you're doing it. And so this is a prime example. I mean, I'm a copy editor in an engineering, construction, architecture, engineering, or environmental services firm that does work all around the world. Not one little paper in one little town, and not one little thing that does, you know, online all over the place. All of it adds up, and all of it pays off.
Now, you talk about storytelling. How far back does your storytelling go? I know you said you started writing as a sophomore. Any stories have you been young with the mic or anything like that?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Look, when I got married, my dad was my best man. Wonderful. And I had no idea, but during my bachelor party, he pulled out a tape that I did when I was in like second grade, and I ran around with a microphone and a tape recorder. You know, hey, this is Mark Fagan. You know, and I was so embarrassed listening to it, but everybody around the table was dying laughing because they're all journalists. And that's the thing. I've always enjoyed telling stories. I've always enjoyed talking to people. And for me, journalism is the one way you can do that. And it's like every day you're talking to people and then you're telling their stories. I mean, what can be more fun than that?
And how did you get to KU? I know you were born and raised on the East Coast.
Yeah, my dad was in the Navy, so I was born in Newport, Rhode Island, of all places. But I grew up in Southern California around San Diego, and I went to junior high and high school around Washington, D.C. People are like, how'd you get to Lawrence, Kansas? Both my parents are from Topeka. My dad was in the military, so I got in-state tuition here at KU. And I always say that it was by far the best decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made. I mean, it's insane how crazy it is that I got to come here, go to this wonderful journalism school, meet all these different people, get all these different connections, and you know, I can pretend like it's all added up to where I am now, and I know that's true, but it's crazy to think about that.
And when you were a student, I know you were really involved with Daily Kansas. How many different roles did you have with the Kansas?
Well, I started. Yeah, I remember. My beat was, what was it? Facilities planning, parking, and operations.
Wow.
So I was covering all the infrastructure stuff, right? I mean, Jim Modig was the guy running planning, and it was amazing. I'd sit there and talk about planning. And then halfway through, I started covering administration, which was crazy because I was going over to Strong Hall, talking to the chancellor, doing all that stuff. So I did that. Then I was an assistant campus editor, and then I went to work for the Kansas City Star and Times. People won't remember that the Times was a morning paper. We had a bureau downtown. It was right next door to the Jazz House.
Oh, wow.
Mighty convenient. And then, so that was great. But so I did that, and then for a year, I was Tom Eblin's teaching assistant. He was the general manager of the Kansan, and so I was effectively grading all the papers for the advanced reporting class. All the new reporters that were coming through the Kansan.
Now, my timing might be off. Were you on the staff when they won the national basketball title in '88? Did you miss that by a year?
I was a baby editor back
then.
Okay. I was a sophomore, and yeah, I wasn't even in J school yet because you had to be a junior to get in. But I was still taking a few classes, and I was a baby editor, so I worked a few copy editing shifts on the rim, and enjoyed that a great deal. And then I was never a copy editor again until I went to Burns McDonnell, and now I'm doing it, and I love every minute of it.
And you've done some acting too. Can you tell me about your acting career?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, I got a call from one of my coworkers who is a producer on the film Jayhawkers. Maybe you've seen it. But Kevin Wilmot, who future Oscar-winning screenwriter with Spike Lee, was doing a film. And he wrote a film about the 1952 Kansas, or whatever it was, 50, whatever it was, KU Jayhawks. Yep. Wilt Chamberlain. They lost in the final, whatever. But I was AP reporter in that movie, and yeah, it was for real. I had real lines. I had to learn lines. It was outrageous.
Did you have to take lessons? Any prep work for that, or what did you have to do?
Yeah, I got the script, let me see, the night before, and I read it over and over and over and over, and then I wrote down all the lines in the tiny notebook they gave me. There's some publicity shots of that movie that are hilarious. They're wonderful, but it looks like I'm a real professional. I'm wearing the fedora. I'm doing the whole bit. But yeah, I wrote down the lines so that when I was interviewing Fog Allen, yeah, better than Thorpe. I mean, it was like these pretzels are making me thirsty from Seinfeld. It was outrageous.
So, did you have to find the fedora on your own, or did they have?
Oh no, they do a wardrobe. Man.
Okay.
I mean, come on.
I didn't know if you had
a star like that. Yeah, they paid me 75 whole American dollars for that. They called it expenses. It was incredible. But I do have an IMDb page. Check it out. Yeah, you can find me on there.
So that was it. No more acting.
No more acting. No. Oh no, actually, that's going to sound stupid, but at work, one of the first things I got to do when I got there, we were a sponsor, because we're a big company, of some NPR pledge drive or something, and so they sent me down to the NPR studios at UMKC, and I read a thing, Burns and McDonnell, blah 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 blah, and people heard me on the radio, and they're like, "Fagan, was that you?" I'm like, "Yep." You think that these things don't work? It's nuts. I voiced a script one time for our annual meeting. Oh, that's right. Now it's 10,000 people in an auditorium, everybody listening, and I was voicing a promo for our company. And there are people afterwards who are like, "Fagan, that was your voice, wasn't it?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah."
And you kind of made that, going back, kind of made that transition early. I know we talked about convergence, late 90s, early 2000s, that was a big buzzword. And it seemed like you really embraced that. I mean, I know you did some headline news, TV, and on the spot. I mean, was that a smooth transition too, or did that take some?
It was. And, look, everybody who's in journalism school knows. I mean, journalists work incredibly hard. Journalists are stressed all the time. Journalists are doing crazy amounts of stuff. What I always say is journalists get to meet everybody. They get to tell whatever stories they want, and they get to just be out there being a part of everything. I mean, I did so many things as a journalist that I would never get to do as just Mark Fagan, Joe Schmo. I mean, I remember bungee jumping at the Kansas State Fair. They had me do a first-person story. I had to write it like it was my last, the last thing I'll ever write. It was crazy. I remember I drove a NASCAR around Kansas Speedway before they even had a race there. They brought out a bunch of NASCAR cars, and I was going 165 miles an hour driving around the Speedway. I got to go cover KU basketball and hang around, and a national championship game. Yeah, that's me at center court, right behind the screen. The jump. The referee guys. The whole point is you do all these different things. And so for me, as a journalist, I did newspaper reporting, but I never thought I was going to do TV. Then all of a sudden I'm anchoring headline news in the local edition. And it was fine. It worked out fine. They told me I was good at it. Fine, that's great. And then, do online stuff. So anybody, anywhere, at any time can read your stuff. Sure, okay. And when you do all that stuff, when you have that flexibility, I think it really adds up and it really works well for when you end up in a corporate environment where everybody's looking around like, "Hey, who can do this?"
Yep.
"Hey, how about me? I can take care of that for you." And that's what's so much fun. That's what's so rewarding.
And when you graduated in 1991, did you have a long-term plan, like this is where I want to work someday, or did you just kind of go with the flow?
I totally went with the flow. But when you talk about long-term plan, I always wanted to be able to do something that I enjoyed and something that I loved. I always like to joke, people are like, "So, where have you worked in the past?" And sometimes I'll throw in, "Oh yeah, I used to work for the Washington Post." I actually was a carrier for the Washington Post. I threw the paper. But the joke was, I remember seeing All the President's Men way back, and I was like, "Oh, I want to be Woodward and Bernstein," all that stuff. What you realize when you're reporting is you just get to tell whatever stories work for you, and you tell the stories that are interesting to others. And so in that regard, I never had a plan other than to just tell cool stories. And like I said, right now, do I tell a whole lot of stories? No, but I make a whole bunch of stories better. And that's what I do every day at work. I'm involved with others telling stories, and it's so much fun.
Awesome. I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but what advice would you give to the journalism students now that are about to graduate, this fall, next May? What advice would you give to them?
Oh, goodness. What always gets me is when I see gloom and doom about the industry. You can't help but read a story that talks about, oh gosh, what's happening in the newspapers, or what's happening to this, what's happening to that. What I'm amazed about is that all these folks that are in journalism school right now have the opportunity to figure out what's next. And so I would just say, do whatever's fun, do what's interesting, and figure out what works. I mean, back in the old days, I never even thought about analytics. I mean, give me a break. I would wonder whether it was singular or plural. Come on. But it's a big deal, and people figure that stuff out, and they see what works, and then they do it. And so I would just say, have some fun, tell stories, and if you're good at it, keep doing it. And even if you're not good at it, just get better at it. I can't think of anything more fun.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I appreciate your time. I know you've got a nice KU mug there, and I always like to close with a little cheers to your careers. You've been fascinating to watch for the last 30 years. So again, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.